Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto went to the galaxy he never knew existed. Naruto discovers a crashed starship outside his village and his life is forever changed. Under the unorthodox tutelage of a Sith Lord's spirit, he will learn the technology and history of a larger galaxy that he, and no one else from his planet, ever knew existed. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 9. Playguys looked around from his vantage point in the hideout at all of the Narutos that were in the room and working on a variety of projects. The shadow clones were divided up into groups and each group was working on a specific technique. One group was working on chakra flow and putting it into a weapon. Another group was doing various chakra control techniques for medical ninjas from information obtained from Amachi's mind. Several giant shuriken were being telekinetically moved around one area of the hideout by at least 3 clones. Each clone was controlling 2 shuriken at once in preparation for a pair of new weapon that another Naruto was designing. The last group of clones were reading through a large number of scrolls that were copied from the library. So far, their plans for getting back to the known galaxy were coming along faster than Playguys had anticipated. For the most part, he had stepped aside to give Naruto more leeway in making decisions and gave him occasional tasks to test him as well as advice. As long as the ship remained safe, then everything would be fine, and he made sure that nothing major had happened to impede them. Playguys expected far more complications and bigger mistakes by his student, but nothing had been a setback for them. Naruto made plenty of mistakes, but all of them were minor and he had learned from them. It was a tactic that he used when teaching Sidious. He would normally severely punish failure and mistakes, but he was far more lenient with Naruto than Sidious. Playguys was also unable to do much with his current condition and punishment was out of the question anyway. The last thing he needed was his newest student plotting against him. Playguys could also tell that there would come times in the future where Naruto would be on his own or separated from him, and it was best to make sure that he could plan and work separately but for the same goal. Turning his attention to the real Naruto, who was meditating nearby and coordinating the clones, Playguys had many thoughts concerning the ninja of this planet. From the information and observations that he and his student had gathered, Playguys found himself with many more questions than answers. He was still trying to figure out how chakra worked and changed the world around a ninja as well as influenced the body. While Jedi could make themselves faster with force run, ninjas seemed to become just as faster and sustain it for longer while also possessing far more stamina than he believed humanly possible. Playguys still wasn't sure just how strong they could become either. He had Naruto undergo many different training methods that even included attaching weights to his arms and legs, but it never seemed to produce a cut-off. Naruto just kept adjusting to the weight and getting stronger. It made Playguys question whether there was a limit. From what he learned at the academy, the Yondaime was apparently so fast that he became a yellow blur of motion, and Senju Tsunade could destroy rocks and buildings with a single punch with her chakra-enhanced strength. It made him wonder where the physical limits of the body stopped and chakra took over to augment and produce the desired results. How fast and how strong could a ninja be without using any chakra? Strength on that level was something that a Jedi could never do. They couldn't enhance their strength with the Force. They could augment the body for a brief period, but Playguys had never heard of a Jedi using the Force to increase their physical strength to lift heavy objects. This was something that he had recently started working on with Naruto, and a group of clones in another room of the hideout had already been allocated to that task. Playguys found it very interesting that the more he found out about chakra, the more he questioned what was possible with the Force. The jutsu from the Scroll of Seals were incredibly interesting, and Playguys was impressed with how many different kinjutsu that ninja had developed. At this point, Naruto had only learned the jutsu that they would need or that they both wanted to investigate. They had only managed to examine a portion of all the techniques that the scroll had to offer. Fuinjutsu was also something that greatly interested him, as it was slightly similar to Sith runes. They could both do incredible things, but there appeared to be little overlap between the two. Sith runes couldn't seal objects into a temporary pocket dimension to hold them there until called back by unsealing the item. Such a simple technique used by ninja every day was still hard to grasp for playguys. It was so archaic with the paper and ink, yet on the other hand it was an incredibly advanced dimensional and timespace technique that was made completely simple and for everyday use. It wasn't even technology but created from simple materials and some chakra, yet it trumped anything that the rest of the galaxy possessed for storage purposes. The whole process intrigued playguys to an incredible degree as it pulled together several of his interests. The more they discovered about Fuinjutsu, the more interested playguys became. Medical ninjutsu was another interesting discovery, especially when Naruto absorbed the knowledge from Amachi. Playguys was intrigued at how chakra could be used to heal as it was more advanced than what could be done with the force. Healing with the force could be rather tricky and only a few were able to use any healing techniques and they didn't seem as versatile as with chakra. Looking toward a nearby clone, playguys watched as that Naruto looked over the maps and memorized anything that might be useful for his journey to Wave Country to find Gato of Gato Shipping Incorporated. The plan was rather simple and made even easier by Gato himself. The billionaire shipping tycoon had isolated himself on a country that had no ninja and only a small population. The country itself was barely noticeable on a map and playguys had a feeling that he knew why the rich man was there in the first place. The reason for the planning was the lack of information about the location they were headed. The mission itself didn't require a large amount of planning, but it was always good to have a backup plan and escape route if things went bad. The escape route was rather obvious as the ocean would provide Naruto all the cover he would need with the ninjutsu that he possessed. While most countries had detailed maps, Wave Country was barely marked on most maps that Naruto could get his hands on, and a detailed map of the wave was impossible to find in Konoha. The best that Naruto could do was a map that detailed the eastern region of Fire Country and that had the most detailed view of wave that could be found. Only a single town in Wave Country was marked with a dot, and it didn't have a name. Wave didn't appear to be rocky and seemed mostly flat. On the best map they had, Naruto counted around 20 islands that were all very close to each other, and on the other maps he had looked at so far, it was always drawn as a single island instead of multiple islands that were close together. Playguys noted a change in his real student meditating near him and knew that his student had just received information from one of his clones, and now the process of absorbing all the collective training would begin. Naruto assumed a meditative position and one by one each group stopped what they were doing and disappeared in plumes of white smoke. Although Naruto had his eyes shut, playguys could see the rapid eye movement as the effects of force comprehension did its work. The force ability was used to absorb and interpret large amounts of information in a short amount of time by speeding up the person's neural processes. A caveat of this technique was that the user had to have some knowledge of whatever they were comprehending and they couldn't absorb knowledge they knew nothing about. However, since Naruto was absorbing the knowledge directly from his clones, that problem was avoided because his clones were him and therefore, he could learn anything using this method. The process was finished and Naruto opened his eyes and they quickly refocused on the hideout he was sitting in. Naruto went to get up but wavered and collapsed back to the ground. He was still conscious, but disoriented. Playguys merely shook his head as his student should have known by then that the mental fatigue from his shadow clones would take a little while to wear off. The first time it happened, Naruto had used a very large amount of clones and had them dispel all at once. He was unconscious for 3 hours and that was the reason why playguys had imposed a limit on how many clones could be created at once. Naruto had gotten a short break from missions and would be taking playguys to Wave Country the following day. He would be leaving a shadow clone in the village, but it wouldn't last for more than a few days, so there was a small window of opportunity for completing the mission. Nearing Wave Country, 2 days later, Naruto arrived at the coast exactly where he had planned. Standing on the shore, he instantly noticed the bridge that stretched a portion of the distance from Wave Country to Fire Country. That wasn't on the map or in anything that I heard about. Naruto thought, and playguys added, this country seems to be so far off everyone's radar that they don't have regular contact with it or really care what happens. This should help us. Naruto agreed with his master's thoughts and proceeded to move out past the waves of the shore and to steadier waters. Once there he was quickly swallowed by the water. Why run on top of the water when he could move unseen by traveling through it? While Naruto moved through the water, he never saw a small boat that had just disembarked from Fire Country for Wave Country. 2 people were on board. The taller one carried a very large sword on his back. It took only a few minutes while in the main town of Wave Country to find where Gato lived. The shipping mogul lived near the docks in a large mansion that was well guarded. Gato apparently built numerous warehouses and enlarged the port in Wave to accommodate his larger ships. Naruto bypassed all of the workers and hired guards as he made his way into Gato's compound. The mansion was rather easy to break into as it had many rooms and all but a few were currently occupied, nor did it seem that they were ever occupied. Naruto felt the life signs in the area and made his way to the only group of them in the building. Walking up to the door of what he thought was the study, Naruto waved his arm at the 2 samurai standing guard at the door and said, "I have an appointment. Stand aside." And both guards put their swords back fully in their sheaths and replied, "You have an appointment, we'll let you pass." And Naruto did just that, but not before saying, "I was never here and you should both take your lunch break." Walking into the room, Naruto immediately caught Gato's attention. "Who the hell are?" But he was silenced by Naruto's use of force grip. While holding the frightened man with one hand, Naruto moved to him and then reached out his other hand to begin the first part of the plan. "This appears to be the place, Zabuza-sama," stated Haku while they both looked at the compound in front of them. Zabuza merely grumbled a response. This was the only job that he could secure that would provide protection for the hunter Nin of Kiri. It was isolated, and considering how few people ever came to the country, they likely wouldn't encounter another ninja. He and Haku had come to make the final arrangements with the client and the demon brothers would follow shortly. They were expected and walked through the gate. Both ninja kept their eyes out for any sign of trouble or a double cross, which could be very commonplace to a missing Nin for hire. Nothing was out of the ordinary until they passed 2 samurai that walked out of the front door of the mansion. Neither swordsman seemed to be really paying attention and just walked right past Zabuza and Haku without really noticing. Zabuza was instantly on guard as he knew that something was wrong. His first thought was that the guards had been put under a genjutsu since they seemed rather unresponsive, and he glanced at Haku. She nodded and they both got their weapons out as they moved inside the mansion with haste. It was still possible that it was a double cross or a trap, but it was even more likely that it was an assassination of their client. "Someone's coming," stated Plagueyes through their link, and Naruto opened his eyes and abruptly stopped the drain knowledge technique. It had only been a few moments since he started and someone was coming? It didn't make sense, and using his own sense, Naruto found 2 signatures that were almost on top of him. He briefly wondered how he had missed their presence, but he remembered that his master's sense was lessened because of his condition and he himself was distracted with the technique. "It looks like we will have to do things a little differently, master," Naruto said over the link. A moment later the door burst open and 2 Kiri ninja entered. Naruto removed his hand from Gato as the standoff started. The ninja looked at him and Gato and he stared at them. Before Gato became lucid again, he knocked out the short man and had to dodge several Senbon the next moment. With a large burst of smoke that concealed part of him and Gato, Naruto stood with his sword unsealed, but instead of staying to fight, he jumped out the window. The larger ninja ran after Naruto while the shorter masked one checked Gato's vitals to make sure he was alright, then left through the broken window as well. In the chaos of the situation, neither Kiri ninja paid much attention to the metal pyramid-shaped object that sat on Gato's lap. Naruto ran on the roofs of the warehouses through the dock area. From the bingo book, he believed he recognized the ninja chasing him as one of the 7 swordsmen of Kiri. Naruto had never fought such a strong opponent before, as the man was listed either at A or S rank in the bingo book, and he couldn't help but wonder how he would manage against him. He had yet to face such a strong opponent in any combat situation. As part of the escape plan if things should go south, Naruto changed direction, heading away from the warehouses and to the ocean. If anything happened, he would make sure that he could get away. He frowned however when he realized that the other ninja was catching up fast, but that also meant that his master would be able to complete the mission. Before Gato woke up and after making sure that the ninja were gone, Plagueyes' spirit form came out of the holocron. This was not something that he had expected his apprentice to do, but it also presented an opportunity and meant that he could have a larger role in their plans. Concentrating for a moment, Plagueye's spirit condensed and then swiftly moved into Gato's body. Said man woke up in a silent scream before he passed out again. Originally, the plan had been for Plagueye to use his mind control on the shipping magnate, and Naruto would occasionally visit Wave to give Gato further instructions and orders. That way Naruto could remain in Konoha and no one would ever notice he had been gone. Draining the man's knowledge would also give them all the information they needed on Gato's operations. Plans changed though, and now Plagueeye was going through the process of possessing Gato. It wasn't transfer of essence, but merely his spirit overriding control of the man's body and pushing aside Gato's mind and will for full control. Plagueeye wasn't sure how long it would last until the body started failing from the strain, as he had never tried to possess any before, especially not someone without midichlorians. He had been curious for quite some time to see if possession was possible on someone of Naruto's planet by a force user like himself, considering the differences in energy and the fact that chakra repelled the force on some level. Plagueeye had been hesitant to try it on someone in Konoha, especially a ninja with larger chakra reserves, and risk being discovered or have another unexplained death in the village. However, Gato wasn't a ninja and only had civilian amounts of chakra that were never used, and Plagueeye could inhabit the body while not affecting his already limited force power that he had in his current form. He would have to channel the force from his spirit through Gato's body, but it was possible. Checking the progress, Gato's mind was being pushed asti to make room for his own, and it seemed the process would be successful. This should work out nicely. After the process is complete, I will need to set up communication with Naruto and deal with the two Kiri ninja. Thought Plagueeye as he started looking through Gato's memories to figure out everything he would need to know in order to impersonate the short man and take over the shipping company as well as the criminal activities. Naruto jumped to avoid the thrown Zanbato as it spun past him and embedded itself into the wooden pier of the dock. Zabuza's figure appeared in a burst of speed and stood watching Naruto from the handle of his sword. They were each sizing the other up, Naruto on the surface of the ocean and Zabuza on his sword. Naruto ignored the killing intent coming from the swordsman and could feel the second Kiri ninja hiding in the piers. He thought that they were waiting for him to let his guard down or see if he was affected by the killing intent, so he made a seal under his cloak and created a water clone under the water, and it swam over the second person's location. Zabuza stared at the short-cloaked assassin and wondered not only who he was, but how he was able to shrug off the killing intent being projected onto him. He would have thought the brat was around 10 years old, but he didn't seem that afraid of facing him. The heartbeat was slightly elevated but not terrified, and besides being noticeably tense, Zabuza could find no other signs that the ninja in front of him was afraid or not prepared for a fight. He also noticed the interesting sword that the boy had and wondered if he could even wield it properly. Naruto watched Zabuza and took an opening stance of the Form 6 of lightsaber combat, which was called Naiman. Both hands were on his ninjato that was held in front of him with the blade downward at the water. Naruto found that he always moved toward that style of swordsmanship more than any other style that was taught to him by his master. It had no strengths but no weaknesses either and was created to be used with two swords/lightsabers, which is eventually what Naruto wanted to wield. He couldn't give up on his ninjato, but he also wanted a lightsaber, so Plagueeye had started working more on Naiman, which was a combination of 4 of the other styles of lightsaber combat. Zabuza raised an eyebrow at the stance and jumped down to the water's surface while taking his sword with him and putting it on his back. Forming a single hand seal, he said, "Hidden mist technique." Naruto watched as mist came over the water and then enveloped the entire area of the harbor that they were in. Perhaps it was arrogant, but he wanted to test his abilities with his sword, as this was the first real chance that he had since its forging to face off against an experienced swordsman. He could have used the force to surprise his opponent and possibly even finish the fight, but despite the risk, he wanted to fight with his sword as much as possible to test himself. Naruto didn't move from his stance and instead felt as well as listened to his surroundings. Using his ability to sense life signs through the force, he could tell exactly where Zabuza was. The opposing swordsman didn't seem to be moving either, and Naruto wondered why. A moment later his hearing picked up an attack heading straight for him and he ducked as a familiar Zanbato emerged from the mist. Naruto struck back and moved under the man's guard to cut him in half. His ears were greeted with splashing water and he realized that he was facing water clones, which explained why he couldn't sense them with his life signs ability as they didn't have any and were just water and chakra. Naruto killed several more water clones in the same fashion and noticed that the real Zabuza was on the move towards him. Closing his eyes, as they were currently useless to him in the thick mist, Naruto focused using his force sense and basic farsight techniques taught to him by his master. Naruto quickly dodged Zabuza's swing but found upon retaliating, that his opponent was able to equally anticipate and block his attacks. Zabuza was both faster and stronger than him, but Naruto was able to keep from getting killed or maimed because of his master's training and his small size. After being pushed back and narrowly avoiding strikes from Zabuza and from a waiting water clone, Naruto created a few water clones of his own to distract his opponent. He used this time to work on a different strategy. Zabuza had the advantage in blade length, but that could be changed. Putting chakra in the vibration components of his blade, Naruto went back on the offensive. Cleaving through another water clone, Naruto was forced to dodge as Zabuza swung to decapitate him. He quickly ducked under the slice, but stuck his sword up, perpendicular to the water to catch Zabuza's sword on the swing. A horrible sound of grinding metal followed and he was thrown back by the force of the man's blow but was rewarded when he heard a plop sound in the water which indicated that his strategy had worked. Zabuza's sword was now much shorter. Zabuza winced slightly at the sound of the blades grinding against each other and was about to wonder what had happened before he noticed that upon completing his swing, his blade felt lighter. The realization didn't hit him until he heard the sound of something dropping into the water. Retreating slightly, he moved into an area where the mist wasn't nearly as strong and examined his blade. Son of a bitch. He mentally raged when he saw that the top third of his blade was missing and he noted several notches on the rest of the blade from the battle. How the hell did that happen? He questioned, but then thought perhaps his opponent's blade was destroyed as well. Of course, at that very moment Naruto emerged from the thicker fog and Zabuza could clearly see his undamaged sword and it seemed to be sparking with lightning. Naruto cautiously followed his opponent through the thick fog and into an area of the edge of the technique. His opponent was standing in front of him and when Zabuza looked at his sword and the feeling of the surrounding area changed. It became far more oppressive than it had been and Naruto could see a visible demon appear over Zabuza that was directed at him. Naruto had never felt such killing intent before and froze where he stood. This was much worse than what Zabuza had produced before and it felt like a weight was pressing down on him. He opened his eyes and could only watch as Zabuza charged at him with his Zanbato readied for a bisecting swing. The figure of a demon above Zabuza never dissipated and Naruto couldn't understand what it was he was seeing. Genjutsu, some other kind of illusion, or was it all in his head? If he could figure out what it was, then he might be able to break the technique that was being used against him. As Zabuza neared him, Naruto felt like he wasn't going to be able to live past that moment, but then something happened. He felt a sharp pain travel through his hand and up the arm that was holding his sword. The pain brought him back to the battle and he narrowly ducked under the blade that sliced the air over his head. Naruto however wasn't prepared for the follow-up low kick that sent him skipping and then skidding across the water to a stop in the thicker fog. Managing to keep himself on top of the water, Naruto was back on his feet and aware of his surroundings as well as the pain in his chest from the kick. A moment later, Zabuza pressed his advantage and tried to create an opening to finish Naruto off or deal any blow that he could. Naruto was getting more and more angry as the fight continued. He still couldn't believe that he froze. If wasn't for whatever his sword did, then he would have died. All the training and I nearly died in the beginning minutes of my first real battle. He thought while evading the heavy and fast strikes of his opponent. Naruto had yet to use any offensive force powers, but he wasn't thinking about that. He wasn't about to die there as he would fail his master and ruin their plans and his dream of seeing the galaxy. Channeling his anger, Naruto tried to hold his ground as best as he could. Zabuza still had many advantages over him except when it came to weapons. Naruto now knew for a fact that his sword was much better than his opponent's. With successive attacks, he was making cuts and notches in Zabuza's blade and had already taken another sliver off the end. It was at that point that Zabuza started becoming more defensive as he was losing more of his sword to Naruto's ninjato and stopped his advance while retreating back. Naruto didn't think it was odd and pressed Zabuza even more. Zabuza jumped back and increased the distance between them, but Naruto wasn't about to let him use any hand seals, and using the force, he pulled Zabuza towards him with the intent of cutting him in half with his blade. Zabuza was surprised when he was yanked forward by an unseen force and was unable to block as the ninja cut through his blade and body. It was at the point where Naruto finished the swing that Zabuza's body turned into water and he heard something from behind him. Water prison technique. Water came up from beneath Naruto and formed a spherical prison around him. The water was much harder than normal and filled with Zabuza's chakra, so it prevented him from escaping. Placing his hand into the sphere to keep it stable, Zabuza was about to gloat when he heard someone behind him. Quickly jumping into the air, Zabuza was shocked when he saw the same technique that he had just used try to capture him. The boy he had captured turned to water as the clone and sphere of water lost consistency. Zabuza didn't jump very far and just enough to escape the technique. He had been using the technique for years and knew that it did leave the user open, so as soon as he landed on the water surface, he charged his opponent. Naruto was still standing where he had been and holding the handle of his sword in his teeth with his hands in the final hand seal for the prison technique. Rather than trying to dodge the charging former Kiri ninja, he did something that Zabuza didn't accept and jumped into his own water prison technique. No sooner than he was inside, than Zabuza's blade clanged against the steel like water. Clever little brat. Zabuza thought and considered what he should do next. He wished he knew some lightning jutsu, but that was not the case and had to think of another option where he would just wait until the boy ran out of air or chakra and was forced to end the technique. Sighting inside his protective sphere, Naruto considered his options. Looking to his sword, he noticed for the first time that it was sparking with electricity, which was odd considering he wasn't touching it. It was suspended in the water next to him, and he hadn't been channeling lightning chakra into it. The strangest part was that the short sparks of lightning weren't spreading that far through the conductive water or electrocuting him. Deciding to investigate this later, Naruto continued thinking of his next move while he noticed that Zabuza was patiently waiting outside the sphere for him to come out for air. Despite the mouth coverings on the man, he could tell that Zabuza was smirking. Sifting through possible next moves, Naruto's mind came up with a plan seconds later and he went into action. Standing outside the sphere, Zabuza smiled as he thought the boy had backed himself into a corner or sphere, so to speak. He wondered what would be the next move as he noticed the boy who was in deep concentration, and then his eyes widened when the cloaked boy went through hand seals and he had a foreboding feeling. 2 techniques at once? He thought and wondered how it was possible or what training the boy must have gone through to be able to perform a new technique while still holding the original. Zabuza didn't recognize the sequence of hand seals for the technique, but could tell because of the bird hand seal at the end that it was likely a water jutsu. The effects of the jutsu took hold when water not only started to gather from the surrounding air, but it was pulled forth from below and created a large vortex around the sphere of water. Zabuza didn't know exactly what was going on, but he knew to move away from the technique as fast as possible. Water release, water shockwave. Fought Naruto inside the techniques and water gushed out from the top of the vortex, creating a huge wave that chased after Zabuza. Shit! Zabuza thought as he glanced back to see a gigantic wave of water chasing him. He wasn't able to outrun the technique, and even if he had gone under the water, he still would have been taken by the effects of the large wave. The wave crashed into the docks and Zabuza managed to latch himself onto one of the wooden piers holding up the docks. Underwater, he watched as many of the other piers gave way under the power of the wave, but his post held and he wasn't washed away across the harbor. A few moments later the water subsided, leaving a good portion of that area of the docks destroyed. Bruised, but not too badly harmed, Zabuza moved out of that part of the docks as he dodged the falling timber from the still collapsing sections. His fog had lifted as it started dissipating when he used the water prison technique. The brat's gone, he thought, but experience told him differently. The large water technique must have been a distraction to hide and perhaps even lower his guard by making him think his opponent had left the area. The water was still agitated from the technique and Zabuza's hearing was unable to find any sound of the boy he had been fighting. Looking down below, he sent some chakra into the water to see if anything was down there. It was similar to using sonar, but he didn't find the brat swimming underneath him. "I know you're still here," stated Zabuza to his surroundings, but the sound of the choppy waves was the only response. In an instant, Zabuza swung behind himself with the flat side of his blade and was rewarded with a thud and the weight of striking someone. Naruto grunted in pain and was thrown back by the hit. He tumbled and then skidded to a stop on the surface of the water near the collapsed area of docks. Naruto used a brief medical jutsu underneath his cloak on his arm and side of his chest to see what was wrong. He didn't have the chakra control to treat the problem, but he could still use the basic medical ninjutsu. The diagnosis was that his arm was broken and his ribs were bruised. If he had been struck any higher on his body with the flat side of the blade, then he might have been knocked unconscious with that hit. Naruto tried not to let the pain get to him or show that he was injured to his opponent, but he could instantly tell that Zabuza already knew how injured he was. "I guess this isn't the first time he's bludgeoned someone with his sword." Zabuza smiled and chuckled at his opponent. For a young brat, the kid had some amazing skill and training. His swordsmanship was excellent and his jutsu was certainly more advanced than nearly anyone else in his age group would be. This had been the best fight he had in a while and much more interesting than fighting Hunter Nin from Kiri. He thought about stopping the fight as it wasn't often he came across someone of this skill and at such a young age, but a part of him wanted to see how the brat would fight with an injury. The cloaked brat didn't seem like the type to just run away. With one arm gone, both fighters knew that Naruto was at a greater disadvantage as he had only been able to stand up to Zabuza with both hands on his sword when he was fighting. Zabuza decided to take the fight to his injured opponent and charged. Naruto knew he didn't have time to go through hand seals with his broken arm. Zabuza was not that injured from the ninjutsu he used, but was noticeably slower in his charge. Preparing for the attack, Naruto grit his teeth and put his sword up in a defensive stance of Naiman but noticed again that the blade was sparking with electricity but more than before. "It's as if it's telling me something," he thought. Zabuza was soon on top of him and Naruto braced himself with the force and chakra to withstand whatever attack, but something happened which he hadn't counted on. His sword reacted and released two arcs of lightning that struck Zabuza in the chest. The missing nin was pushed back a good distance from Naruto and the effect was likely compounded by the fact that Zabuza was still wet from Naruto's ninjutsu. Naruto stared at the effect and his sword as Zabuza cursed and got up from the attack. "I didn't use lightning nature chakra, which means that was force lightning. But I don't know how to use force lightning," he thought, and he searched his feelings for an answer. He hadn't channeled lightning through the sword or used force lightning. The sword itself had produced the force lightning. It made sense as this was the first time he had used the sword in an extended battle and he really didn't know what all it could or could not do. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to further examine the situation as Zabuza was now up and looking rather pissed as well as smoking and singed from the lightning. Instead of attacking with his sword again, Zabuza started quickly going through hand seals and Naruto put his sword handle in his mouth again while trying to produce seals with his broken arm. He managed to get the seals created, but he was much slower than Zabuza. Interestingly enough, both produced the same technique at nearly the same time and Zabuza was surprised because Naruto had used far fewer seals and yet had managed the same water dragon technique. Zabuza noted that Naruto's dragon was also bigger and was surprised a second time when it managed to push back his water dragon. Dodging, Zabuza got out of the way of the striking water dragon but it coiled and lashed out striking Zabuza and sending him into the destroyed docks. Naruto let go of the sword handle in his mouth, caught it with the hand of his good arm, and charged toward his down foe. This would likely be the end of the battle and he could go back to his master before heading back to Konoha. Naruto was nearly at the down Zabuza when he felt an attack coming and tried to dodge. He was unable to dodge it completely though and several Senbon pierced his body. 3 in his leg and 2 in his broken arm. He grimaced at the pain and remembered the Hunter Nin that was traveling with Zabuza. Evidently his water clone had been destroyed and now he stood facing the new ninja. His arm was more useless than it had been, as now he was having trouble bending it and knew from looking at the location of the Sanban that it would be useless unless he removed them and waited for it to heal. I won't be able to use ninjutsu now, I'll just have to rely on the force then. He thought and studied his new opponent. Instead of fighting, the hunter Nin went and helped Zabuza up while keeping his or her eyes on him. Naruto thought the fight would continue, but a voice stopped the fight. You might as well stop. I've seen what you can do, Zabuza, there is no reason to go any further. Stated Gato from the top of the undamaged area of the docks. Furthering the fight would only destroy more of my docks. Come, we have much to discuss and you can leave. Stated Gato while looking at Naruto and secretly giving him instructions through their mental connection. Gato walked off and was followed by the two carry missing Nin. Zabuza was being supported by the other ninja. Playguys had successfully possessed Gato and given Naruto the instructions on what to do before leaving. He had been told to go back to Konoha and given instructions to build something. Naruto smiled slightly as the impromptu plan had been a success, but he was disappointed that the fight had ended. Even against a fresh opponent, he thought he still might have had a chance to win. Pulling out the Sanban, he then sealed his sword into the storage seal on the working arm. Naruto had one task to do before heading back to Fire Country, as he was still working with a limited time period to complete this mission and needed to get back to the village before he was discovered missing. Before leaving Wave, he went to one of the many warehouses that had been built in the new docking area. His master told him where it was and what to look for inside it. It wouldn't take long as he only needed a few of the items inside, so he pulled out an empty storage scroll. Back at Gato's mansion. Any chance you can inform us what's going on? Otherwise, I might just leave. Threatened and aggravated Zabuza, as he didn't like being in the dark about something. Gato seemed perfectly fine for a man that was likely about to be killed by an assassin, and Zabuza wanted to know what was going on and who the brat he just fought was and if he worked for Gato. That was simply a test. Ninja are so hard to trust that I had to know you wouldn't back out of the deal or try to take advantage of the situation. It was also to test your skills. Rumors about strength and prowess in battle tend to get exaggerated, and I wanted to make sure you're as good as I've been told. Stated Gato while walking down the hall of his mansion to his study. He didn't seem fazed by Zabuza's anger or killing intent at all, or was good at not showing it. So you pitted me against someone just to test me. What would have happened if I killed the little brat? Inquired Zabuza, and he received a curt answer from Gato, that I wouldn't have had to pay him. Zabuza frowned slightly, and he wanted to know more about the cloaked kid that was apparently on Gato's payroll. Before he could say anything, Gato said, "We can discuss your employment later. Dinner is at 6 in the dining room, it would be best for you to come. You can stay in any room in the south wing." And with that, Gato entered his study and shut the door behind him, leaving both Zabuza and Haku standing there. Looking at the door, Zabuza narrowed his eyes but left with Haku to find a room. Gato wasn't exactly how he heard him mentioned, which was a greedy and cowardly bastard. The short man seemed very calculating and manipulative. There would be time to get more answers later, and he intended to find out more about his new employer and the boy that worked for him. Playguys entered his study and looked into the mirror on the wall. His frown turned to disgust at the reflection that looked back at him. This body was nothing like his original. His new body was tall, long-limbed, and graceful, while this body he was possessing was short, stubby, and unbalanced. The features reminded him of an Ugnaught, which was a pig-like humanoid, and the thought made him cringe slightly. Going to his new desk, he started getting his papers and files in order. He didn't have time to look at anything earlier, as he wanted to make sure his students survived the encounter with the two ninja. He knew that Naruto would likely fight and not try to get away, as it had been some time since the boy had a battle. Playguys had arrived just in time to see Naruto's sword discharge force lightning. It was disappointing that he had missed most of the battle due to the body of Gato having such stubby legs and being so out of shape. However, seeing the sword's ability more than made up for it. The ability he witnessed was one that he had heard of, which could be associated with Sith swords. During a battle, the sword would absorb the energy in conflict, which caused it to build up a charge that could be released as force lightning. Plagueis had been wondering for some time if the sword possessed any ability beyond what he already knew about it. Naruto had yet to show any ability in force lightning, so it was a valuable power for the sword to have. Getting up and browsing through the nearby filing cabinets, Plagueis looked for all of the information on Gato's business and holdings. He had access to the man's memory, but Gato didn't remember everything, and Plagueis was filling in the gaps and looking through the company records, holdings, and accounts. His student's idea to possess Gato was much better than just using mind control, although Plagueis was still less than thrilled with the body. With control of the entire business, Plagueis could gather, build, or create all that they would need to further their plans. He could also look into other interests that he had with Gato's money. In short, he could now accomplish all of his secondary goals that he had come up with that didn't involve his student. Before that, the main task he had to accomplish now was to set up communications with his student. Unfortunately, communicating with Naruto from Wave to Konoha was too far for him using their connection and telepathy. Usually, distance didn't matter with the Force, but that didn't account for his limited abilities as a spirit since, without a body that possessed midichlorians, his Force power diminished greatly the farther a person was away from his spirit or holocron. Possessing a body allowed him to separate from his holocron, but even then, his Force ability diminished the farther he got from his holocron in his new body. This meant that he needed an alternative way to communicate with Naruto and had come up with just the method while heading to the docks earlier. Finding the correct papers in the drawers of his desk, Plagueis pulled them out and started looking through them. He needed to familiarize himself with the operations of his new company as well as connections with the world of crime. Looking over to his desk, he frowned at the placement of his holocron. The device was sitting on top of his desk where he had left it earlier, and though he was loath to admit it, the metal pyramid made an excellent paperweight and was more inconspicuous that way. He frowned slightly at the thought and the fact that Naruto had to return to Konoha before someone noticed he was missing. He would need his student to place a storage seal on his new body the next time he visited Wave and then seal the holocron into it. In the meantime, he would leave it on the desk as it was less noticeable there. It would look strange for Gato to carry around the metal object with him wherever he went, so he would not stray too far from the mansion or the holocron on his desk. Fortunately, he had recently acquired a large group of pawns, and even with limited force ability, he could get them to do anything he required. Back in Konoha, 2 days later. Naruto sat in the hideout behind the Hokage faces and unsealed the scroll he filled while in Wave Country. When the smoke dissipated, several devices and pieces of technology were revealed. Naruto had taken a radio, computer, camera, television, and a few other things that he would need. He was currently in his workshop area of the hideout where he kept his tools and pieces of technology from the ship as well as items that he had found on the planet. He already procured a good-sized satellite dish at an earlier point, and now he could use it in something. Getting his tools out, Naruto started disassembling the larger pieces he had taken from the warehouse, which had been full of crates to ship to different parts of the elemental nations. Naruto started meditating while he went through the boring tasks of taking everything apart. He removed the outer casings of the larger hardware and then took everything apart piece by piece. It took a little while, but he used that time to think about what had happened since Wave Country. His arm was healed and he had regained full use of it. Earlier he had examined both his memories and his sword to figure out what happened. He couldn't use force lightning with it whenever he wanted, and he assumed it had to do with the fighting with Zabuza, as that was the most he had ever fought at one time with his sword. It had also been 2 days without any contact from his master. That was the reason he was in such a rush to disassemble the pieces before him and create a communications device to contact his master. He believed that in Wave Country, his master was likely building a very similar device. Naruto once thought that he was alone in village. He only had a few people such as the Hokage and the Ichirakus to talk to, and even then, it was limited as he couldn't spend all day with them. When he met his master, things had changed. It was true that he no longer talked with the Hokage very much or the Ichirakus, but he always had his master with him or close by. Despite losing people to talk or be near, he had a single person that he was even more close to and that offered him more than he could ever imagine. Since the time he first discovered the ship, his ties with the village had been all but severed. It didn't really faze him, which it probably should have, since he used to dream of being the Hokage. However, when compared to the thought of seeing a galaxy he once knew nothing about, the title of Hokage seemed trivial at best.
Plagueis knew everything about him and was always there when he needed help or guidance.
He also told him everything that Naruto had wanted to know and which no one else wanted to tell him. That he was aware of, Master Plagueis had never lied to him, which was more than he could say for the rest of the village. Thus, he had never been truly alone, that is, until now. His master was miles away and they hadn't been in contact for several days. Now he was completely alone for the first time in his life. Even when the villagers hated him and looked at him like they did, it didn't compare to the crushing loneliness that he had always felt. That had gone away when his master found him. No, it didn't go away completely, it got pushed aside, but it was still there and now it's back. Thought Naruto as he let his hands remove the last components from the computer and start on the television. In the past few years, he had a lot to deal with. The stolen items that he kept hidden, not making a mistake or getting caught while furthering their plans, and living a secret life known by no one but his master. Through it all, Plagueis was always there for him. His master had taught him so many different things and needed his help. No one else in the village really needed him or wanted his help, and for that, Naruto was grateful. Even if he was being used to help further his master's plans, someone was finally paying complete attention to him and didn't care about the Kyuubi. The village didn't need him or want him and never stopped giving him those looks. Naruto had never been truly able to control all his emotions or feelings, he just put on a mask and hid everything. He was the student of a Sith Lord and he himself was a Sith, so he should act like one. His master was counting on him and he finished disassembling everything. Examining all of the parts that he had, Naruto started work on putting together a makeshift communication device. He would use a small power generator that was on the ship to power the device. Normally the generator was used to charge up power cells or other items, but it would more than serve his purpose. The stress and loneliness seemed magnified now that he was alone. His master had been training him for this by giving him numerous choices and letting him make his own decisions, but Naruto hated the loneliness. Just sitting alone in the hideout was starting to get to him and he dove back into his work. He had most of the device assembled and was putting on the camera and attaching the monitor so that they could see and talk with each other. Naruto would use the satellite dish to amplify the signal and he had to make sure that the village wouldn't be able to pick it up. He idly wondered if he should find others or at least someone else to talk to now that his master was gone. He had given up several chances to form new bonds with people in the village, most of which were at the academy. There were people all around him when he was in the village, but he didn't want anything to do with most of them. It was hard considering what he had done in the village. He heard people couldn't be friends if they kept secrets from each other. Ironically, the closest people he had to friends were his two genin teammates and they were spies for another village. It was a sad thought but completely true. Perhaps I can find people in the galaxy. It's so big, I doubt I would be alone forever. Now that I think about it, perhaps I can still find people like that here. He thought. It was just him and his master right now, but would it always remain that way? Eventually he would leave the village and perhaps people outside of Konoha and Fire Country would be different and he could make friends. The thought brought a sad smile to his face. It was at that point that he finished connecting all of the wires and turned on the generator. The screen flickered and he adjusted the dish and the signal to be the same as the one his master was using. He wasn't sure how long it would take for Plagueis to create a similar device in Wave Country. Naruto pushed down all of his useless emotions inside himself that he had started letting loose while working on the device. He pushed them so far down that his master probably couldn't feel them and perhaps he himself couldn't feel them either. Naruto, like he had been training to do, used emotions when he needed them and he had been learning to wield them along with the dark side of the Force to great effect. There was no need for many of the emotions that he still had though, but he did still have them, so he merely hid them as best as he could, considering that didn't seem capable of getting rid of them entirely. It was a weakness that could be exploited by an enemy that was adept with the Force, which was why he hid them. Once he was done, his features became an emotionless mask and his eyes looked alert, cold, and uncaring. He would only need to wait for his master's transmission and he wouldn't be alone anymore. He had a feeling his master had much to tell him and there would likely be updates to their plans and further planning to be done.
Naruto idly wondered if his master had seen his fight and if he was proud or thought Naruto did well against such a foe.
Pushing those thoughts aside, he started working on the plans for his new weapons and wondered when he would get the chance to make them, considering what happened the last time he used a furnace in the village. He also had the plans for the fusion reactor for the ship nearby. Lists of all the parts and materials they would need as well as machinery were nearby as well, but he still didn't know where they would start working on the reactor. Wave Country didn't seem like a very secure or safe place. It was isolated, which was something they needed, but it was so close to Konoha that even a single ninja mission to that country could get them discovered. The place looked rather destitute when Naruto was there. He could feel the sadness of the people that he passed while getting information on Gato's whereabouts, and it was not a place he wanted to return to. He still had some trouble keeping out the thoughts and emotions of others when he was in a crowded area where strong emotions were present. Naruto looked around at the hideout and thought that he might miss the rocky lair that he had helped discover, expand, and fortify.
Chapter 10.
Playguy sat in a comfortable black chair behind his wooden desk. The body he was possessing was beginning to show signs of the possession. He had to wear glasses to hide the sulfuric yellow eyes that Gato now possessed, but the body was holding out and there was no degradation yet. He thought perhaps he could last for another year or perhaps longer. He had heard of possessions that had lasted months and ones that had lasted for years, but this wasn't a body that had midichlorians, so he wasn't sure how long before he would need his student to carry his holocron again or find another body. The pudgy hands of Gato absently touched the storage seal on his arm where his holocron was kept as he waited for his student, who was likely moments from arriving in Wave. They had been in contact with each other over the communication system for several months now. Naruto was coming in person now to talk about their future plans as well as other things. Tensions had risen with the inhabitants of Wave, and Playguys could feel that in the near future, something would happen. He knew that his host's life would be in danger, as it was only a matter of time before there was a revolt of some kind in the country. Before he possessed Gato, the short man had bullied the people of Wave into submission. There had even been a public execution and numerous beatings. The main village of Wave was destitute and the only hope that they had was the bridge that was being constructed from the main island to Fire Country. Interestingly enough, Gato had been secretly helping along the construction of the bridge, despite the fact that it could destroy his monopoly and hold on the country. The reason for this was that the man planned to kill all the workers before the bridge was completed and then complete the bridge with his own workers, name the bridge after himself, and then make everyone pay a heavy toll for its use. Gato had planned to use the bridge to transport numerous contrabands into Fire Country and then into the remaining elemental countries. The contraband would be shipped to Wave Country from outside areas that were less strict on shipping. The contraband included drugs, weapons, and anything else that was banned and that Gato could profit from. The reason for acquiring Wave had been to use it as an unrestricted port and storage area, since restrictions and checking of ships for contraband had become much more common at ports in the larger elemental countries, and it was hindering Gato's smuggling. Playguys cared little for the bridge or Gato's plans and had done nothing to further instigate the villagers, but he hadn't done anything to help them either. After much meditation, he came to the conclusion that the situation could work to his advantage and could be used to test a few of the kenjutsu that had been acquired from the Scroll of Seals. Playguys had already purchased and gathered a large amount of the materials, resources, and machinery that would be required for repairing the ship, but lacked a good staging area. Wave Country could not provide what they needed for the next stage of the plan. The country was of fishermen and had no trained workforce or anyone that could be of much help to him. The ground of the country had a very high water table and was rather marshy, which limited the use of underground structures for hiding the ship and creating what they needed. Using his newfound wealth and possessed body, Playguys had started looking for a good location for a hidden facility for the ship and in order to work in private. Gato didn't have a spy network or really any kind of information network, but he had made numerous connections in organized crime. Money was not a problem and Plagueis had found a very intriguing place to set up their operations. It was very isolated from the rest of the elemental countries, it had a dictator that was apparently low on money, and from what he found out, it was more technologically advanced than any other country. He had already talked to the dictator of the country to set up arrangements for moving there and providing money in exchange for sanctuary, privacy, resources, and manpower. While the fusion reactor would be built by Naruto and himself, the substance that would seal the hull of the ship would need to be created and it required the building and operation of a small chemical plant. Further talks between himself and the dictator would proceed in the coming months and Plagueis would move his operations from Wave to the new country. In addition to his search for a staging area, he had also started using Gato's money to find other information and items. Plagueis started looking for any stories or tales of how ninja came to be or how they came to the planet. No one on the planet knew of the rest of the galaxy besides himself and Naruto, but that didn't mean that he wouldn't find some old tales or creation stories about something that resembled a starship. As of yet, he had found very little. It was obvious to him that some kind of colony ship brought humans to this planet, probably several thousand years ago. There were too many colony ships that had left the known galaxy in search of a better planet over the years to know when it had set out or where it had come from. In the time since then, the humans of the planet probably forgot about technology and the rest of the galaxy. However, he found no mention or knowledge of the existence of a ship. That could have meant many things. It could mean that the ship left and headed back to the known galaxy or that it was destroyed, crashed, or perhaps that it was just forgotten about. Plagueis had found information concerning the Sage of Six Paths, which was a mythical or perhaps a real person that first discovered the secrets of chakra and taught others. He had been interested to know more and perhaps when this person, if they were real, existed. Time periods for when the person existed ranged from between 500 to nearly 1,000 years previously. The oldest records that Plagueis could find on any subject were around 600 years old, which was likely due to the state of the ninja of the lands. They had been warring between villages for 100 years and between clans for longer than that. Such fighting usually left gaps or destroyed an entire history of people, especially if they could only record it on paper scrolls. Paper just didn't last very long unless it was kept in the optimal environment, which was more than could be expected. Plagueis had also looked for information on the Biju and discovered more knowledge than Naruto had learned in the academy, but not enough knowledge to be that useful. He found only a few people in history had been able to control the tailed beasts and they possessed special powers to do it or were Jinchuriki, but it was unknown exactly how they controlled the beast sealed within them. He did find that the tailed beasts had been split up among the larger ninja villages and knew that they were either sealed in an item or inside of a person. The only way it seemed that Naruto would ever be able to control the creature sealed in him was with some kind of special bloodline that he didn't possess. From meeting the beast inside the seal, Plagueis knew that the Kyuubi was sentient and very intelligent. Naruto didn't possess any ability with mind control beyond persuasion and mind tricks, so it wasn't likely that he would be able to control the creature with the abilities he had. While Plagueis could control the minds of others, he wasn't sure that in his current state he could ever control the Kyuubi. The only thing that could be done concerning the Vulpine creature was to leave it in its cage and let the seal hold it back. Plagueis had no idea what using the creature's chakra would do to Naruto or how it would affect his force powers. It was possible that the chakra would stop him from using the force at all, considering how powerful it was and how it would likely repel the force. Despite the restrictions on rank, Naruto had already looked through the Jonin section more than once, but there was quite a bit of information in that section and it would take more than a few brief break-ins to collect everything. Naruto was already trying for the special Jonin rank and would take the exams during the next Chunin exams, which was in 6 months. Their plans had been furthered with the takeover of Gato shipping, but in the interest of taking advantage of an opportunity, Plagueis wanted Naruto to get all of the information that Konoha could offer. Konoha was the only storehouse of knowledge that they could get their hands on at the moment. The other villages were out of the question because of issues with distance and the fact that breaking into another village would be infinitely harder than stealing from Konoha. Getting up from his chair, Plagueis walked to one of the large windows in his office and continued to think of the current situation while staring at the ocean view. The only other storehouses of knowledge that they currently had available to them were people. Several people in the village were well noted for knowing a cacophony of techniques such as the Sandaime, Jiraiya of the Sannin, and Hatake Kakashi. Orochimaru was also one of these storehouses, and probably the most appealing because of his ambition to collect and learn all of the jutsu in the world, but he was no longer a part of the village. In order to access these other repositories of ninja knowledge, they would need either luck or to create a situation where it would be possible. This was exceedingly difficult, however, as each person on that list was not to be taken lightly. Playguys knew it was improbable that Naruto would ever encounter a situation where the drain knowledge technique could be used on the Sandaime without ANBU forces coming down on him. Jiraiya was just as unlikely as that person was never near the village and hadn't been for years. That left Hatake Kakashi as the only person of the group that could be put into a situation where he could be captured or knocked out and information could be taken from him. Playguys knew that the situation in Wave could be used to their advantage in order to lure the copy ninja to a trap and access the supposedly 1,000 jutsu that the man had apparently copied with his Sharingan during his lifetime. The eye itself was also of interest to him, and although he could take the eye, it would be just as easy to get a small tissue sample without alerting the owner that anything was wrong. Looking into the reflection on the glass window, Playguys both heard and saw the door to his study open and the cloaked figure of Naruto enter. In Konoha, Shimura Estate. Shimura Danzo sat at the desk in his study while he looked over different reports on many different topics that concerned the Leaf Village. His right eye was exposed as he read the reports, and the red eye did its job to copy all of the information so that he could remember it later. It was one of the many advantages that the dojutsu granted him. His mind traveled on a particular train of thought as he looked through all of the information on his desk and sifted through all that he knew pertaining to Uzumaki Naruto. He hadn't always been keeping such close tabs on the container of the Kyuubi. It wasn't until the boy started moving through the academy at an accelerated pace that Danzo had become more interested. While he did want the container trained into a weapon, he would not make any moves until he was Hokage. His current thoughts on the Kyuubi container had started out very differently when the information first came to him, and at that time he had no idea where it would lead his suspicions. His root forces had been secretly looking for the Raijin and the Nidaime scroll since it was stolen. They hadn't been looking for the actual object as he didn't have that kind of manpower, but they had been looking for any rumor or mention of the legendary blade. A sword so unique and flashy easily caught anyone's attention and people would talk. The current user of the blade should have been passed around by word of mouth, but in all the years since the blade had been taken, nothing about it had ever reached his ears. It was never mentioned, and no one seemed to be carrying it or using it. That fact was rather odd considering just what the blade was. It was possible that whoever had taken the blade had taken it to be part of some private collection, and that was what Danzo had believed at the time. Sometime after that incident, a genin was killed in the village. The crime was obviously the work of a professional as no evidence of any kind had been left at the scene and many things about the crime were suspicious. The Sandaime had never managed to figure out just what had happened, but his mind worked differently than Hiruzen's did. Murder or assassination was only performed for specific reasons. It could be frivolous emotions like jealousy, hatred, love, or even for revenge. It could have been just a mission hired by someone that wanted the genin dead or because of a cover-up. However, none of these reasons made any sense. The genin was a nobody in the village and would likely have remained a genin for life. He had no hobbies, no enemies, only basic techniques, never been on any important mission, never angered anyone, had no connections in the village, and knew nothing that would have been any importance to anyone. Only the final reason for killing someone made any sense if the incident was not some random event by a disturbed individual. That reason was personal gain. While the teammates didn't gain anything, or the sensei, or any other ninja in the village, one person gained from the death of Tsurugi Misumi, and that was the academy student that took his place on the team. Uzumaki Naruto was placed in the open slot right out the academy and within a year was already a chunin while working on better missions with a more experienced team. From what he knew, the boy was ready to take the special Jonin exams and would when the next chunin exams came around in 6 months. It was only a theory at the time and he had dismissed it as purely conjecture and grasping for a connection that wasn't there. It was equally likely that it was luck that had gotten the container that position, but a lack of other killings since then had left the theory as plausible, and with the other information he put together since then, the theory has become a likely truth.
Not long after the genin's death, the scroll of seals was stolen right from under the Hokage's nose.
The person what was likely to blame for the theft was left without any memories, or the scroll, which was also what had happened when the Raijin and scroll were stolen years before. A jutsu that was capable of erasing all memories from an individual could be very useful, and according to his root ninja Fu, who had been a very accomplished member of the Yamanaka clan, it was not something that was very easy to do, and even his clan didn't possess a jutsu that could perform those effects while leaving the person's brain unharmed. Similar to the Raijin, his root Anbu had investigated outside the village for any mention of the scrolls, but again found none. No one had claimed responsibility or gloated over the theft. It didn't really make sense, as he knew there should have been some mention of the scroll. A logical explanation for the lack of any information on the theft of both scrolls and the sword was that they had never actually left the village. Whoever had stolen them hadn't left the village because they were a part of it and were examining or keeping the stolen items. It took time to come to this conclusion though, and by that time the container had already been at Chunin for more than a year.
He wouldn't have suspected Uzumaki Naruto if it hadn't been for his earlier suspicions concerning the death of the genin.
It makes sense that a person wanting to push forward in rank would want the items that were stolen for themselves. Had been his thoughts on the matter, and he had copies made of all the boys' records to look through for any anomalies. He still received regular updates on the boys' missions, and any mention of Uzumaki Naruto was quickly brought to his attention. He looked through record after record and did find several things. While in the academy, the Chunin instructors had sent letters to the Hokage which were followed with meetings. The letters were almost exactly the same word for word concerning the boy's academic success and the recommendation that Uzumaki Naruto should be skipped ahead a grade. Once was not suspicious, but happening 3 times, with nearly the same reasoning and wording, was. Looking through the dates, he had also discovered a dip in grades around the time of the first incident in the village. Skipping ahead, he had found an even larger dip in grades when the genin was murdered. The dip was large enough to push Uzumaki out of the head of the class. It also meant that the boy wasn't placed in the standard group for the Rookie of the Year, which the Sandaime always favored. These occurrences were good enough for him, so he placed his best censor to secretly keep tabs on the boy to confirm those suspicions. Due to having many other missions for the Foundation, Fu had not been able to keep a constant tab on the container, and Uzumaki also went on many different missions outside of the village that his root member could not safely follow. For the last 6 months, Fu had been giving his weekly reports from his observations. The root Anbu reported initial trouble early into those 6 months as he was spotted following the container and had to back off to a safe distance. Apparently, the container possessed a keen sensing ability that Fu was not sure about. It didn't seem to depend on chakra and had a limited distance. This also meant that no other person besides Fu could keep proper tabs on the boy without getting caught. Normally a sensor could sense another sensor, but that was not the case. Fu was able to sense that he had been sensed, but not that Uzumaki was a chakra sensor. He also reported that the boy's chakra felt strange, which was the only way that he could put it. Each person's chakra felt different, which was how people could tell others apart, but Uzumaki's felt slightly different from everyone else. It took several months for Fu to be able to find anything incriminating. When Fu reported that the container was able to create shadow clones, that had been all the information that he had needed to know that his theory was correct. The only thing he wasn't sure about was how the boy had erased the minds of the 2 ninja of the village and operated so carefully while seemingly untrained in such matters. Fu also learned that 2 genin, one of them Hyuga, were also periodically keeping tabs on the boy. Fu reported that the girl was interested in the boy's sword, or that was what he overheard while eavesdropping on the pair. He had been rather interested to hear Fu's report that the container had created a unique sword that stood above other swords, and the kunoichi that mentioned this was the daughter of a weapons shop owner, so the information could be credible. The sword was supposed to be insanely sharp and amazingly crafted. While this was not that incriminating, it fit perfectly with the reports from the investigation into the death of the genin. Since then, Fu had also observed that the boy was up to something, and also that something was strange about the building that he lived in. When the boy entered the stairwell to his building, Fu reported that something happened, but he couldn't be completely sure what it was. The only explanation he had given was that the container's chakra flickered for a brief moment in his stairwell and he also used a jutsu, but Fu couldn't be sure which one.
The most recent development was just 2 days prior.
The container had created a shadow clone to stay in the village while he himself had left and no mission had been given to him. Fu had immediately reported this and he told his subordinate to follow the boy and he had sent Sai along with Fu so that he could receive regular updates. So far, he had found out from Sai's ink birds that they were following the container east and heading for wave country or the ocean. He was very curious as to what the Jinchuriki of the village was doing leaving the village and where exactly he was headed.
The only problem that he was having was what would he do with the information.
He couldn't go to Sarutobi about it as that would reveal his illegal operations to the Hokage. The situation required a great deal of thought. A few of his other operations were put on hold so that he could focus entirely on this problem.
What exactly is the Kyubi container up to? Back to wave country. Naruto entered his master's study and sat in the chair across the desk. He didn't have to wait long for the short man to look away from the window and focus on him.
Using the force, he could feel that Plagueis had a good deal to talk about with him and was trying to choose his words. Now that we have come to this stage of our plans, I feel you have waited long enough and it is time to reveal to you the entirety of my plans. Stated Plagueis in Galactic Standard Basic, which they often used to talk to each other. Moving away from the window, he started walking around the desk. Naruto was rather confused as he wasn't completely sure what his master was talking about. Sensing his confusion, Plagueis continued, "My plans are far larger than just fixing the ship and returning to the galaxy, my student.
Did you ever even wonder how or why I ended up on this planet?" He questioned and Naruto searched his thoughts and feelings for an answer. I never actually thought about it, master," confessed Naruto after a short period and Plagueis nodded as he had already known that would be the answer.
Naruto knew that he had lost his body and bits and pieces of information about his history from stories of his homeworld and of the Sith. His student was very trusting and had never really questioned him about his motives or background. Naruto had only ever questioned him about what the galaxy was like and practically nothing about his own past. He knew that his student, while curious and inquisitive, was far more interested in training, learning, and the galaxy than what had led him to the planet.
Perhaps I should start at the beginning. And he paused for dramatic effect. I learned from my own master decades ago. He taught me everything that I know and then he passed on. I in turn looked for my own student and found one such student to be my apprentice. Sensing Naruto's confusion he mentioned, "You were not the first student that I taught, you are the second. I taught my first student everything that I knew and shared with him all of my knowledge that he was interested in. You are very different from him, different tastes, different upbringing, and ultimately a very different student. After his training had been completed, he helped me to complete the ambitions of myself and the Sith who came before me of the Order, which was to conquer the galaxy." Plagueis revealed and could feel the shock and surprise in his student. "You will see when we get to the known galaxy that it is not always civilized. Crime, corruption, piracy, slavery, and many other problems are rampant through even the more civilized systems. As Sith, we seek to conquer the galaxy in order to bring order and peace to every planet. The current republic that has been in place for nearly 1,000 years is growing more corrupt every day and isn't able to police its own borders or protect its people from threats. Even the Jedi are unable to do this," explained Plagueis, and he could feel the understanding in his student. "Plans of these can be very slow and take a very long time to complete. Many before me were unable to further the goals of our order. As you know, I enjoy learning and furthering my knowledge in any field. The more I became entrenched in my research, the less I noticed changes in my apprentice. Therefore, it came as a surprise that after completing my newest discovery in midichlorian manipulation, he murdered me in my sleep," stated Plagueis as he completed his circumnavigation around Naruto and his desk. The shock this time was palpable and he could feel the anger in his student concerning what had happened. My apprentice destroyed my body and left while setting the reactor in my research building to overload.
It was fortunate that my holocron was saved due to my implementation of Sith runes in the area of my personal quarters and research area. The destroyed building was shortly after found by gun runners that were nearby and detected the explosion. They took my holocron along with several other items that I kept in a secret compartment in my quarters and continued their smuggling operations. I did not make any contact with them as I was still in the process or attaching myself to my holocron and did not count on one of them opening one of the sealed cases I kept the necklaces in.
He was slowly possessed by the necklace and set an unknown course into the navigational computer.
He then started attacking the crew. One of the crew killed him but was unable to stop the ship from continuing its course or making it back to the known galaxy as by that time, the ship was terribly off course. The ship was abandoned and it ended up running out of fuel in this system by chance.
And that is how I came to be on this planet.
Finished play, guys, and he waited for his student to absorb all of the information he had just given him. Naruto just sat quietly in his chair as he reviewed everything his master had just told him. To him, it was an incredible story. Naruto had never asked what had happened and thought it was because he didn't necessarily care about it at the time and didn't want to say or do anything to upset his master. Playguys had offered him things no one else had and he wasn't willing to cause conflict between them or inquire into his master's past.
He had only ever been concerned with fixing the ship and getting into the galaxy.
Looking up from staring at the desk in front of him, Naruto looked questioningly at his teacher and wondered what else he was going to tell him. Noticing his student had taken everything in, he continued once again, "During my time here on this planet I never expected to encounter such an interesting power and people such as these ninja, nor did I expect to take another student, but I don't regret doing so. As I did tell you, I would like to go back to the known galaxy in order to obtain the proper supplies and equipment to study chakra and your people, but there is far more that I would like to do. I cannot seem to forgive or forget what my apprentice did, and I still have one project that I left unattended back in the known galaxy which I will need to check on." Naruto thought about what his master had told him and wasn't sure how he fit in. "I don't have any skill with experiments or research and really can't help Master Playguys. I've never really thought about what I might do once I arrive in the galaxy. I've only thought about going there and seeing what there was to see. What more use can I be to him?" Naruto thought and didn't like where it was headed. Would he no longer be useful to his master? "Therefore, while I am working on finding a new body for myself and my research, I will need you to help me look into what my former apprentice is up to. It's unlikely, but by now Sidious could be ruling a portion of the galaxy or at least setting up his own plans for taking over the galaxy. I will need you to work on pulling together resources and gathering intelligence until the time is right. My former apprentice is very gifted and does receive force visions, so we must not alert him to my continued existence or your existence until the time is right. Sidious has no doubt gathered power and probably has an apprentice of his own that is older than you and has more training. He may also have gathered other forces that have been used by the Sith in the past. It is best to stay in the shadows for now until we know more about what he is planning and what plans are already set in motion. It is also possible that we will need to start gathering other people as well before we leave. Having a few more ninja might be helpful in the beginning, and perhaps the method with which you manage to develop force powers can be determined in time and the process completed with others. Now, what were you going to tell me when you walked through the door? I could sense you had something else that you wanted to discuss. Finished Playguys sitting in the chair and looking directly as his student with his sunglasses off to reveal his sulfuric eyes. Naruto had to think about what he wanted to discuss when he first walked into the room, as so much had happened and been revealed since then. Remembering the information he had wanted to tell his master, Naruto began giving the abridged version. "I believe something will be happening in the village during the upcoming Chunin exams." Playguys, or rather Gato, raised an eyebrow at this as it might disrupt their plans. Originally, Naruto would stay in the village until he became a special jonin to get everything out of the library that he could. The examination to test if he was ready for the new ranking was scheduled to take place during the break between the second and third segments of the Chunin exams. Naruto, as part of his Chunin duties, would be a part of the Chunin exams. They planned for Naruto to sneak out of the village during the Chunin exam finals after getting everything from the library and perhaps even taking a look in the Hokage Tower for other information, as the Hokage and most of the village would be distracted with the exams.
Questioning his apprentice, Plague Eyes asked, "How did you come by this information?"
"I gleaned the information from Kabuto and Yoroi when we met for our last team meeting. They were getting another genin to take the Chunin exams with, but their thoughts were concerning something that was supposed to happen during the exams besides the 3 stages. Orochimaru was also mentioned in their thoughts, but I wasn't able to get anything specific,"
Naruto curtly informed Plague Eyes.
Plague Eyes sat back in the chair, closed his eyes, and briefly thought about the new development. It would be important to determine what exactly was going to happen, as it could help or perhaps even hinder their plans. They planned for Naruto to leave the village without getting placed in the bingo books or having ninja come after him. To do this, he would use the Kenjutsu and the Scroll of Seals to fake his death, but as of yet, they didn't have a situation where Naruto might be killed by someone or something.
This new development could provide what they had been looking for. Investigate and see if we can use it to our advantage, but don't get involved with Orochimaru if that person does make an appearance," ordered Plague Eyes, as he was doubtful if Naruto could fight against such an opponent and knew his student might try and get into a fight he wasn't ready for. Though Naruto hadn't been using everything he had against Zabuza during their fight, Orochimaru was on a different level, and even Plague Eyes didn't know exactly what kind of jutsu or methods the Snake Sennin employed when fighting.
They only had what the bingo book said, which was very little, and it wasn't advisable to face such an opponent without detailed and reliable information.
He also wouldn't be there to help his student if something happened.
"To the northeast is the warehouse that contains all of our supplies and equipment that will need to be moved to the new hideout. It all needs to be sealed in scrolls for travel. The ship that I will be taking is docked nearby.
You can put the scrolls on board.
I have also procured the supplies that you wanted and constructed the item we talked about,"
stated Plague Eyes, and Naruto nodded.
Plague Eyes could feel the boy's anxiousness to go, but there was still one thing to take care of first. "In the meantime, there is still much to do in Wave before I leave. You must return in a few months to further our plans.
I will inform you then what will be happening and contact you when the time is right,"
stated Plague Eyes, and with the conversation over, Naruto left to go to the warehouse. Hiding out of what Fu had determined was Uzumaki Naruto's sensor range, Sai had already drawn several ink mice that had traveled the distance to the mansion. They were waiting for the return of the ink creations.
Fu knew Naruto had entered into the mansion and was meeting with someone else.
They didn't know exactly who the second person was and would have to find out later, but he did know that it was a civilian and not another ninja.
By the time the mice came back, Naruto was already on the move, and the ink creatures lost consistency on a blank scroll that Sai had.
The ink formed into words of a conversation that was recorded by the creatures, but oddly it was all gibberish, as if the two people had been speaking in a different language. Fu frowned as he hadn't been able to get any closer than the distance they were at unless he wanted to alert the target. For some reason Sai's technique didn't work except for only a few words that were recognizable. These words included Orochimaru, Kabuto, and Yoroi. Whatever the conversation had been between Uzumaki Naruto and the owner of the mansion was lost to them except for those words. Deciding it wasn't a complete loss, Fu and Sai sent a message back to Danzo before they followed Naruto deeper into Wave Country.
"Zabuza-sama, the boy came back again.
He doesn't seem to be heading to Fire County, but somewhere else in Wave this time," reported Haku to her master. She had been keeping a lookout for the cloaked boy, as Zabuza was very curious as to what the boy did for Gato in Fire Country and what the short business tycoon was really up to. At one point he thought the man was going to take over the country, but that no longer seemed the case.
"Follow him and see what he's up to," ordered Zabuza, and Haku complied.
Glancing at the doorway his tool had just left, he wondered just what he had gotten himself into when he signed on for. They were safe from Hunter Nin, the job wasn't difficult, and they were paid very well, but Gato was nothing like he had anticipated. The short man seemed to have plans within plans about everything, and he wondered what would happen by the time his contract was up. Due to the size of Wave Country, it didn't take Naruto long to reach the hidden warehouse and small dock that his master had built. They were well hidden from the ocean and few people from Wave Country went out to the islands that were the farthest from Fire Country. Moving to the warehouse, Naruto glanced at the yacht that was docked nearby and then quickly made shadow clones to perform the needed tasks. His master had provided all of the storage scrolls he would need and his clones would just have to seal up all the items in the warehouse. The clones opened the warehouse door and Naruto's eyes widened at the amount of crates and other supplies in the warehouse. While the clones went to work sealing up the large items into the sealing scrolls, Naruto went to the opposite end of the warehouse. He smiled as he looked over the items that he had asked his master to procure. After seeing the demon brothers, he had wanted a mask like they had, which were rather difficult for Konoha ninja to acquire given that they were not sold in Fire Country. He wouldn't wear the mask all the time though, as it could detract from his ninjutsu that were used by means of the mouth, which accounted for a large portion of the ninjutsu that he knew. His master had also gotten him different types of wrist launchers for sunban and arm guards that he could later modify however he wanted or needed. Several weapons were also there that he knew his master had found interesting, like the Kuzarigama, a medium-sized folding fan from Suna, and an assortment of ninja pouches filled with supplies. The last items were blocks of chakra metal that were purchased at quite an expense and would be used to make his newest weapons. Pulling out his own scrolls, Naruto had a shadow clone seal up the new items he had received while taking some of the chakra metal. He unsealed his tools and pieces of metal from the cockpit door of the ship that he had taken years previously. Walking over to the largest item that his master had gotten him, Naruto smiled as he looked at the furnace. While still requiring wood as a fuel source, the furnace would let him create his new weapons in secrecy. One of his clones started bringing in wood that was freshly cut from outside and Naruto worked on starting the furnace. He could use the force to increase the heat to what he needed and he had set aside the whole day to work on his new weapons as he had gotten a few days off from missions in Konoha. Fu and Sai followed the Kyuubi container at a safe distance until he stopped. Neither Root Ninja could see what Naruto was doing as they were far enough away from him that they couldn't physically see him through the thick groves of the area. Pulling out his scroll, Sai penned several mice and after the jutsu was finished, they scurried off in the direction that Naruto was in. Naruto had already melted both metals that he would be using for his new weapons. They would be altered with alchemy in a similar fashion to how he made his sword. He wasn't sure if his newest set of twin weapons would have the same kind of bond with him that his sword did or similar abilities as his sword because they weren't swords and he wasn't sure if all of the Sith rituals would work exactly the same or not. He would have some kind of bond with the weapons but perhaps not on the same level as with his ninjato, which was made the Jedi forging rituals. Over the course of several hours, various things happened in the warehouse. His shadow clone slowly sealed and stored all of the items in the warehouse until it was empty save for the original Naruto, the furnace, and the tools he was using. Naruto progressed through most of the rituals he was using. The metals were combined with Sith alchemy to create a single alloy which was then shaped with his tools and the Force. Naruto let himself be guided by the Force to create the unique objects and was oblivious to all other things around him. He never even noticed that his shadow clones had dispersed. With each strike of the hammer and heating, the weapon took shape. As one weapon neared completion, the other was still just a fused hunk of metal and the same process would have to be used a second time to forge it as well. The piece of metal he started working on first had taken a donut or ring shape with 4 fins or teeth, one in each of the cardinal directions on the circular piece of metal. The entire width was less than an inch thick, while the width of the ring was about 4 or 5 inches thick. The diameter of the weapon was about 2 feet, which was slightly smaller than a giant shuriken or windmill shuriken, but enough that he was satisfied with how it was turning out. He had created the donut shape because that was how his master had described the disc blade to him and also because the altered metal became rather heavy and it was much lighter to create a donut shape than make it solid like a giant shuriken that only had a small hand hold in the center. Naruto also had to create the ring for the handle and 2 pieces to attach the ring in the center of the donut hole. The metal itself was also turning red just like his blade did, and as he created the razor-sharp edge around the disc blade, the edge darkened to black as well. As the first disc was finished, he created the ring and attachments for it and then put the pieces together. Examining the finished weapon, he smiled and couldn't wait to show Master Plagueis. Setting the first disc blade aside, he reached for the other chunk of alloy and noticed that the heat of the furnace was dying. After a quick hand seal, a shadow clone appeared and went off to get more wood while the original put the metal into the crucible and put it into the fire so it would start heating and melt again. Naruto was feeling tired, but he wasn't about to let it stop him from creating the second disc blade. His eyes widened when he felt the false Hunter outside the warehouse. She must have arrived when I started working on combining the metals. I was so caught up I didn't even feel her. He thought, and he wasn't that concerned about it. The girl would likely report to Zabuza, but the information would stop there. Who was Zabuza going to tell? His clones hadn't noticed her because they didn't have any force power, being that they were not flesh and blood and created completely from chakra. Thus they didn't possess his life-sensing ability and were not able to sense the girl who was currently on the roof of the building. Fu and Sai had waited patiently for many hours to determine just what the Jinchuriki was doing. Coming out to Wave Country raised numerous questions, then a meeting in a mansion with an unknown person. Sitting in the trees and waiting nearly 60 meters away from a warehouse, they weren't able to see what was going on while said Jinchuriki made an unknown item in a forge was definitely not what either thought they would be doing. They couldn't go back to Danzo without knowing exactly what the Jinchuriki was making, and they had been sending regular reports with Sai's messenger ink birds while several other ink creatures went to see the warehouse and find out what was happening. So far they had not been able to retrieve much information. Everything in the warehouse had been sealed in scrolls and stored on a nearby ship, but they didn't know exactly what items had been in the warehouse. The ship was close enough to the warehouse that they couldn't go without risking detection. Fu wanted to unseal a few of the scrolls and find out what was inside, but he didn't dare get that close. There was also another person watching the Jinchuriki. Fu could feel a person that was much closer to the warehouse than they were, and he wondered if Naruto could feel the person as well. Nothing about the mission was making any sense. Why come all the way out here? Was the Jinchuriki selling village secrets or working for someone? What was being made with the furnace? Who was the other person following the target? Sai had sent an ink creation to view the other person following the target. If the picture that was drawn from Sai's inked creature was any indication, a Kiri Hunter was following the Kyubi container. That made Fu even more confused, as he couldn't figure out what Kiri would want in Wave Country or why they would be monitoring the Konoha Jinchuriki. Haku sat on top of the warehouse and occasionally scaled the side of the building to look into the window to see what the boy was doing. She was very curious, but also very bored. She had been in the area for several hours, and it didn't look like the boy was completely done making whatever weapons or items he was forging. She had already spent time collecting some herbs and watching as the clones filled up the boat with scrolls of sealed items from the now empty warehouse. She sighed as she watched the horizon. If she had known it would take this long and get this boring, she would have brought something to do. Deciding to pass the time by exploring more of the surrounding area again, she jumped off the warehouse in a different direction than she had already explored and glanced back at the building when she noticed something odd. It was a white and black mouse that was sitting on the edge of one of the warehouse windows and appeared to be looking inside. The mouse was odd because it was outlined in black ink, almost like a drawing, and looked fake. The mouse hadn't noticed her but was transfixed on what was happening in the warehouse. Haku narrowed her eyes at the pseudo-creature and wondered who had created it. There weren't any people in Wave besides herself, her master, the demon brothers, and the boy, so it must be someone from outside the country. Are they spying on just the boy or Gato as well? She though. Technically it didn't really matter, as if they had found out that Zabuza was in the country, the information might reach someone that it shouldn't. She decided to let the boy take care of the situation, as she didn't want to be spotted either, so she tossed a sunbon at the mouse. Naruto's attention was instantly averted from his furnace to the sound of breaking glass. He grabbed his finished disc blade and moved to the nearby window where he heard the sound. A small portion of the bottom pane was broken, and along with the broken glass on the floor was a sunbon and ink. From his life signs ability, he could tell that the fake Hunter had probably thrown the sunbon, but where did the ink come from? He had a bad feeling about the situation and ran to the door of the warehouse. His hands went into a single hand sign and he created 9 shadow clones that, along with himself mixed in, dispersed into the surrounding area.
My mouse has been destroyed.
Sai stated within a monotone, and Fu quickly realized that they had been spotted.
We need to leave,
he stated, and they both jumped into the trees and back the way they had come hours earlier. Fu could feel the hunter Nin staying still in a hiding spot away from the warehouse while multiple clones of the Jinchuriki headed in every direction. He couldn't tell which of the clones was the real one and motioned to Sai that they needed a better method of retreat. The real Naruto looked up as his eyes spotted motion through the breaks in the canopy of the trees. He pulled down his goggles and saw a large white bird, with a thick black outline to its shape, take flight with two people on its back. He didn't recognize either person on the creature and jumped to the top of the trees to take action. He reached the highest point on the tree he was on and then hurled his new disc blade. The spinning blade moved towards the bird and he adjusted the trajectory and speed using his telekinesis. The bird was moving fast in the direction of Fire Country, but his disc blade was catching up. Naruto didn't know how well he could control the blade to hit the target or how far away the blade got before he would start to lose control of it. This was his first time using the real thing, as he had only ever practiced in limited spaces with a giant shuriken. Fu's eyes widened as he grabbed Sai and jumped off the bird before it was destroyed by some kind of large shuriken. There was no time to have Sai maneuver the bird as the weapon had come out of the sky above them. The shuriken tore through the bird with no resistance, and as the pair of root ninja fell, it came back a second time. Fu pushed against Sai, which separated them enough that the shuriken flew through the space created between them. Both ninja fell into the trees below with a crash and the shuriken returned to its owner. Fu stood on shaky legs as he got up from the fall. Nothing was broken, but he had been bruised rather badly by the tree branches that he smashed through. Putting his hands into the ram seal, he sensed the surrounding area for the Jinchuriki. He's coming for us. I need to get to Sai and get out of here. Sai's signature was easy for him to find and he raced in that direction. He knew he couldn't get back to Fire Country with the container on his tail. While Uzumaki Naruto was only a chunin, his chakra reserves were higher than nearly everyone else in the village and he couldn't outrun someone like that over the water between the two countries nor on foot through the trees. It was over a day's journey back to the village, the container would outlast him and catch up. He needed Sai's jutsu to get back to Konoha. What kind of weapon can be guided from such a far distance without using any chakra? It had no wire attached to it and yet it was controlled enough to not only hit the bird, but come back a second time while we were falling. He thought. Fu surmised that the weapon was whatever had been created in the furnace in the warehouse and knew Dazno would want to get one or want know everything about it. The weapon barely made a sound as it traveled and was better than any other tool he knew of for such distanced combat. Only his experience had let him evade it and save both of them. The Jinchuriki was closing fast, but Sai was just up ahead. Coming to a stop on a branch, Fu looked down to see Sai sitting and waiting for him, but by the way the boy was holding his arm, Fu could tell it was likely broken. He was relieved to see that Sai had his scroll out and was already drawing another bird for them, though struggling as the broken arm was his writing arm. Uzumaki was almost on top of them when Sai completed the jutsu and they were getting on the bird when something caught Fu's eye when he glanced into the direction the Jinchuriki was coming from. A reddish-black object had emerged from between the gap in the trees and was heading right for them. It made little noise as it flew right at them and cut into the newly formed ink bird before they could take off. The bird dissolved into ink beneath them and both were left standing on the ink-covered ground. The shuriken curved back into the forest surrounding them and was caught by the cloaked figure that had just landed on the branch of a tree nearby. The figure said nothing but just looked them over, probably trying to determine who they were and what affiliation they had. Fu faltered for a brief moment as he wasn't sure what to do. He was unsure if any of his clan techniques would work on a Jinchuriki or whether he should even try to use them. This mission was never meant to include direct combat, but he looked to Sai, who was standing behind him with his scroll open, and saw his counterpart had already finished drawing a few ink animals. A small nod was given and Sai used the jutsu which sent multiple ink tigers at the cloaked figure. Fu prepared to use his mind switch jutsu even though he wasn't sure it would work. Naruto didn't stay still but slashed with the disc blade to destroy two of the tigers and dodged the others while charging in to attack the two unknown ninja.
Fu used the moment to execute his jutsu, but instead of moving his mind into the boys and taking over the body, his mind hit a solid barrier and bounced back to him. Disoriented for a moment, he was left open when Naruto struck him with the flat side of the disc blade with a thud that sent Fu to the ground. The moment Fu's jutsu failed, Sai put down his scroll, unsheathed his tanto with his working arm, and attacked. Naruto dodged the swing and kicked Sai in the abdomen. He wasn't trying to kill either ninja as he wanted information from them, but if it came to it, he would kill one and spare the other. While Sai recovered, Naruto delivered a swift blow to Fu that knocked him unconscious. Swinging the disc blade again, Naruto destroyed the final ink tigers that had come up behind him and then knocked away a volley of shuriken from the second ninja. He stared at Sai and frowned. Using the force, he pulled Sai toward him and cut the boy in half with the disc blade, but instead of blood, the body bled ink and then dispersed into a puddle of the black liquid. Looking toward the ground, Naruto put his hand out and the ground broke upward under his force power until the real side was pulled out from under the ground. Before the surprised dark-haired boy had time to do anything, Naruto's chop had hit the boy in the neck and knocked him out as well. A moment later, several of the shadow clones he created back at the warehouse arrived and tied the two unknown shinobi up for him. They jumped off toward his master's mansion while the real Naruto went back to the warehouse. He still had a second disc blade to create and his master would decide what should be done with them as well as figure out who they were and what they were up to. Back at Gata's/Plajuiza's mansion, Playguy stared at the two tied-up ninja before him. Both had chakra-suppressing seals placed on them and weren't going anywhere. He had already gone through both of their minds, the older ones being far more difficult to access than the younger. The knowledge had been very informative. The older ninja, whose codename was Fu, had been following and keeping tabs on his student for several months. The man who Naruto had been looking into, Danzo, had apparently turned the tables on his student and was getting far closer than anyone else at figuring out their secrets. It was an interesting turn of events and he was still thinking on what he should do. The two ninja before him couldn't be killed as that would cause much more problems for them and attract far more attention from Danzo. Although damage had already been done since they had come so far and seen so much. They had found out that Naruto left the village periodically and had some kind of connection with a mysterious person in a mansion and was creating something in Wave Country. The girl Haku had been seen but Zabuza had not been, which was good. Messages had already been sent and that couldn't be fixed, but those messages barely scratched the surface of what was really happening and what Naruto was really involved in. The two ninja before him were also an opportunity. Playguys now knew far more about Danzo than Danzo knew about him and his student. The location of the Root ANBU headquarters as well as detailed information about its members was now known to him. This Danzo does a good job of working in the shadows and keeping those from suspecting him, but his results leave something to be desired. He thought, as apparently Danzo had sent his Root ANBU on numerous missions in order to protect the village, but most of those ended in failure. However, the man's continued interest in his student might get them discovered, or at least part of their plans discovered. With the new information and with the two sitting in front of him, Playguys believed that he could hinder Danzo's efforts. The older ninja in front of him was the primary person involved with spying on Naruto, and if he controlled that person, then Naruto wouldn't need to worry about being discovered doing something incriminating. The younger ninja was of little use to him, but if both didn't return too, it would cause Danzo to look much harder at what Naruto was up to, which was something that they didn't need. Despite Danzo knowing about Naruto's trip to Wave Country, there was nothing the man could personally do about it. He couldn't go to the Hokage to tell the village leader about Naruto without admitting to treason. The Hokage would want to know where the information came from and proof which Danzo couldn't provide without admitting that he still had a secret group of ninja that worked behind the Hokage's back and were not under his authority. Whatever information that Danzo had and whatever educated guesses the man could make concerning what Naruto was up to was only useful if someone else could prove it. The real problem was that Danzo might be able to get someone else to start looking into Naruto or would act on his own, as he knew from Fu's memories that Danzo wanted to turn his student into an emotionless weapon. As of that moment, he had no idea what Danzo would do with the information that had been acquired on Naruto. That was the real problem and situation that had to be dealt with.
Danzo apparently had obtained a Sharingan that could hypnotize people to his will. That meant that just about anyone in Konoha could be under his control or at least put under his control. The eye wasn't nearly as versatile as his own mind control techniques though, and Danzo's eye could only be used once per day on a specific person concerning a specific matter. Looking to the two unconscious ninja, Plagueeyes came up with his own plan on how to deal with the situation. He would use his own mind control technique on them and have both of them spy on Danzo, as well as having the older one provides limited or false information on Naruto's activities in the village. Using his mind control, he could have them create a story to tell Danzo about what had happened since their last report.
If Danzo kept getting more curious or made plans to do something, then Naruto would have to act.
He didn't know if his student could face an opponent like Danzo, as he had no idea what the man's techniques and abilities were. None of his own ninja had seen him fight or train, so it was possible that Danzo was completely out of shape as a ninja, or that he was just as dangerous or more dangerous than Zabuza. In any case, the decision over what to do with Danzo would have to wait, but Plagueeyes was interested in learning more about the Sharingan and gaining Danzo's knowledge. The old Warhawk was now high on his list of people to use drain knowledge on, probably just below Hatake Kakashi, who was the first name on that list. The thought reminded him about his coming plans concerning Wave Country, which would take place in a few months. He would need to meditate further on that plan and figure out the exact details. Getting up out of his seat, Plagueeyes went to the two ninja and began the process of putting both under his control and giving them detailed instructions. The process would be completed by the time Naruto came back later that night with his finished disc blades, which he was very interested to see.
Konoha, 2 days later. When Naruto returned to Konoha, he wasn't sure what to expect. He had been caught, and on some level he thought perhaps Anbu would be waiting to take him to the Hokage. He was under a henge like he always used, and had used a mind trick on the guard to not ask any questions and let him enter without seeing any identification. 2 days earlier he had returned to his master's study to find that the two ninja were gone. He had asked where they were and Plagueeyes had told him they returned to Konoha. He was surprised at first, but his master knew what he was doing, so he didn't question it. Plagueeyes informed him that both were under his control and had been working for Danzo as well as spying on him for quite some time. He was informed about the existence of Root and that something might have to be done in the future. With the mind control, the two Root ninja would only report to Danzo what Plagueeyes had told them to report and leave out all other details. They would also be used to spy on Danzo to keep their plans and activities safe.
Naruto left shortly after that and knew he would be returning in a few months to help his master leave Wave Country. Naruto wanted to go with his master to the new hideout, but he still had too many things to take care of in Konoha. He needed to prepare the ship for travel. There was still a great deal of knowledge to acquire from the ninja library.
He now had to watch out for Danzo and anyone else that was trying to find out information on him.
As a Chunin, he had to work on the upcoming Chunin exams, all the while getting everything ready to leave, and making sure he wasn't caught in the process. It was a long list of tasks ranging in difficulty, and it was definitely going to keep him busy for the next 6 months. His eyes once again looked to the Hokage monument faces where his hideout was. A lot had happened this week, and he was still trying to take it all in. He still couldn't believe that he had never wondered or asked what Plagueeyes planned to do once they left the planet, or how the ship had come to crash on the planet. He had been so focused on the goals that his master talked about, he never considered the motivation and reason behind them. Besides exploring the galaxy, he hadn't contemplated much about what he wanted to do once they left. He couldn't help but wonder what his master's other student was like. Why did he betray Master Plagueeyes? Why does he refer to his first student as an apprentice and not refer to me the same way? Those were both things that he thought about as he walked towards his apartment. Making the usual switch, his real self headed to the hideout while his clone headed to the apartment. After traveling through the secret entrance to the hideout, Naruto walked into his workshop area and unsealed all of the new items that he had gotten. He didn't feel like working on creating or modifying something at the moment and went over to another room that had all of the jutsu that he had collected. He had nearly mastered the 5 elements and knew quite a few jutsu, but he wasn't that interested in learning any more at the moment.
It seemed like he never needed all of the jutsu that he knew or even a quarter of all the jutsu he knew, but given time he would learn all of the jutsu he had amassed. Even if he never ended up using all of them, it was useful to know them just in case he found himself in a situation where they would be useful to him. His vision quickly passed over the scrolls that he had stolen and his eyes stopped at the cube holocron that was sitting with some of the scrolls. It was the Jedi holocron that he couldn't access, and he always wondered what secrets it contained that he could never obtain. There were a few force powers that he was working on, but again he didn't feel like working on that now. He thought about making a trip to the ship, but he wasn't willing to risk it being discovered. It was quite surprising to him when he discovered that he was being followed, and especially when Plagueis revealed that he was followed by one person off and on for a whole month without him knowing. The reason for this was due to his large chakra reserves. They were so large that he couldn't suppress them completely, and a trained sensor could apparently find him very easily. It was irritating to know that he was so easy to find and follow. His life signs ability had a short range of only 100 feet or so and was nothing compared to the distance that an experienced chakra sensor could achieve, which was more than a kilometer. The problem could only be solved in one of two ways, or at least those were the only solutions he could come up with. The first solution was to work exclusively on training to suppress his chakra to such a degree that he could escape detection. That was a difficult solution, as even using the force to try and suppress his chakra as much as he could, did not fully suppress it. The second solution was to find an alternative method to suppressing his chakra. He had a feeling he could figure out how to accomplish complete suppression of his chakra by using Fuinjutsu, and he set about looking through the scrolls he had with Fuinjutsu information that were copied from the library. Even if his chakra was completely suppressed, he could still use the force and his weapons to fight. Once he got off the planet, he really wouldn't need to worry about his chakra that much, as force-sensitive individuals couldn't normally sense chakra. Plagueis theorized that a Jedi could sense the presence of a regular ninja because of the void created from the chakra acting as a barrier to the force, but not the chakra itself unless specifically trained and attuned to sense it. A Jedi that could sense life signs would be able to sense a ninja, but they wouldn't feel that different from any other person in the galaxy. Naruto's chakra allowed the force to flow through him, so he wasn't a void in the force like every other ninja. Plagueis could sense when chakra was used or if a jutsu was being used, but he could not pinpoint a person or find someone based on their chakra. Of course, even that marginal ability to detect chakra was after numerous years of being around Naruto. It was possible that no Jedi or Sith would ever be able to find him based on sensing his chakra. It was because of this that he didn't feel it was necessary to work on suppressing it, because it wouldn't be very useful when he left the planet and possibly would never need to worry about suppressing his chakra ever again. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.